Thanks for tuning in. This is Minds of Tomorrow. I'm your host, Luis Acevedo, and with me today I have Brett Pike. He is the founder of Classical Learner. Brett, thanks for coming on the show today.
Hey, Luis, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course, man. So before we get into, what Classical Learner is and what your business is and what you do, I think a good place to start is to talk about your background, how you got into education, and the beginnings.
Yeah, well, I was always kind of a problem child in school, and I was hyper. They would call my parents to the principal's office. Brett punched someone in the face again. And in elementary school, they actually wanted to put me on ADHD medication. And my mom said, hand me the bottle. So they said, oh, we don't have it here. And she said, you're lucky, because I was going to turn it sideways and shove it right up here. And I thank my mom to this day for not drugging me and doing what the school system does to so many children, where it zaps their creativity, it zaps their love of learning, it zaps everything that makes a child special in the first place. Like this crazy idea that maybe little boys aren't meant to stay cooped up in a classroom all day. They're meant to get out, run around, roughhouse, play, and explore the world. And I kind of always floated through school. I got B grades and whatnot. Played lacrosse, went to college. I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I decided I wanted to be a history teacher. And I started taking college seriously, or any school seriously, for the first time in my life, probably about my junior year of college. And I really started to cram down and do well, as they say, with that. And then I graduated with a bachelor's degree in history education, started my student teaching and whatnot, went back to get my master's degree in special education. And by that time, I was fully in the system. And I wound up graduating with a master's degree in birth to two special education. And I was given the award for the top student in the entire program. I had a 4.0 GPA, out into the work world. And I quickly found that the school system is completely broken from the base level down. I was on my live stream earlier today, and I was talking about a really jarring incident I had where I was teaching ninth grade global, and I was working on an inner city. So you could picture it for yourself, what that looks like, an inner New York City. And I'm teaching ninth grade global, and I didn't think this would be a pressing part of my lesson. I just started teaching. So I put up a map of the world, and I said, okay, who could show me where Africa is? It's ninth grade, mind you. And I had blank stares all around. And at first I just thought they didn't want to answer. And then I quickly realized that not one student in that inner city, in that ninth grade class, was able to identify Africa on a map. And I knew how broken the system was. And I started to look outside the system, and I came across the works of really great thinkers like Richard Grove and his Peace Revolution podcast, Through Tragedy and Hope. And they started to talk about classical education and the trivium of grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and how the so-called, I don't call them elites, the controllers educate their children. Came across the works of John Taylor Gatto, who was the New York City Teacher of the Year in 1988, 1989, 1990, before he would abruptly resign. And he would spend the rest of his life eviscerating the schooling system, saying that the schooling system is not a failure. The narrative that the schooling system fails to teach math and science is incorrect. You're judging it by the wrong metrics. The schooling system is very successful at doing what it's designed to do. The 7 hidden lessons of public schooling. That children are being trained to outsource their thinking to authority, to know their place, to not question authority, so that they can be made into indoctrinated, indentured servants.
So you spent a lot of time in the educational system, both as a student and as a teacher, I believe. I'm not sure how long you were a teacher, but as you were going through the system here, was there ever a time, like during your education, when you were like, there's just something not right here?
Well, I mean, that's the thing. I came up through the system. I graduated with a degree in history education. And even upon that graduation, I didn't think there was anything necessarily nefarious or wrong with the world. I kind of understood the world through that very basic concept of there are left and right wing politics, and here are these historical events, and that this is how they happen. But when I graduated and I saw how broken the system was and I started looking for outside answers, I came across, like I said, I came across Richard Grove. Yep. And when I came across him, I'm a historian, right? So although they taught me a fake history, I didn't know how to get back to primary documents. So he started making these claims, and me being a naturally curious person said, this guy's an idiot and I'll show him how wrong he is. So I started going back through primary documents, and one after another, as I started digging deeper and deeper, I said, oh shit, I'm the idiot. But for a mind that's not broken, for a mind that, I credit my parents that I always had unconditional love, but I didn't have a broken mind and I wasn't worried about what people would think of me. And because of that, as I got that new information, cognitive dissonance never set in. And for me, it was fun. And I went from one rabbit hole to another, going through all these primary documents. And I always loved history, but I was discovering history. It was living right in front of me. And it was completely opposite. It was like a different dimension than that I was taught in my schooling, right, and what were presented.
So what I found from people who are interested, are open-minded enough to accept that they've been lied to, is they sort of had this tendency of always seeking truth in their life. Is that true for you? Like was there always this like itch to know things deeper and find the truth of things? And would you attribute that to your ability to break out of that paradigm you were in as a teacher and going through the educational system?
Yeah, well, when I was a child, my dad had mantras, and he would always say, do the right thing and pikes never lie, like ad nauseum. He doesn't drive unless everyone has a seatbelt on. Those are three things. But you do the right thing and pikes never lie, ad nauseum. And because he was so resolute in that, I took a lot of that on. And I remember when I met my now wife, and again, I was completely indoctrinated when I met my wife, and God bless her, because she dealt with me becoming a completely different, the same person, but a different person. Yep. And I told her that I wanted to save the world. That's what I want. I told her, and what an outrageous thing to say, right? But yeah, the truth is, as my understanding of the world has evolved, I've never really dropped that spirit. My understanding of how that's done has changed, right? I've become very spiritual. I look to God. I pray to God that I could be a better servant to him every night. I say, I pray that I can serve you better. I pray that I never ask God, this is where I want to be. I pray that he puts me where I need to be to grow on my soul's path and to serve him as a servant of Christ. And with that, it's led me down a path where I started writing children's books. And I wrote books that teach children not just about their rights, the First Amendment, the Second Amendment, the congressionally documented history of fake news, the Federal Reserve Bank, but the books are actually structured to mirror reality, to teach children or to familiarize them with mechanisms of propaganda, right? So in Operation Mockingbird and the Church Committee, which is fictional living history based on the true story of the Congressional Church Committee, early in the book, they are shown this up-close picture of a bear stealing a bike. And the news rooster says, this bear is a bike thief. And then later in the book, you get the wide angle lens, and he's, you can see the whole picture, and he's walking the bike into a repair shop. He's not a bike thief. He's a bike returner, right? In free speech, social media censorship, and the First Amendment, Charisma Cat is feeding baby piglets and puppies to hungry coyotes. But she's doing it through her center called the Saving Puppy Center, right? You're showing children these mechanisms of manipulation, these mechanisms of propaganda. And I actually teach a class right now, every Thursday at 10:30 a.m. I teach a live class using the Cubs and Bears children book series, in which I've really built out an entire universe. And I'm basically acting out this elaborate play where I'm the news media. I'm Charisma Cat, the arch villain, the archetypal representation of the controlling bodies, as well as Satan on a grander level, right? And as well as stand-up bear, who is really just Owen Benjamin. So yeah, I write my books, and I'm teaching my class, and I started a homeschool company, and I'm building out curriculum where I'm showing children how the media industrial complex works, the medical industrial complex, the military industrial complex. We are getting back to the land. Our students are tracking the sun, mapping their property, building garden boxes, composting, planting seeds, growing their seeds, harvesting their fruit, and then getting entrepreneurial experience. So as I've followed this journey I've been on, as I've followed my soul's path, God has put me where I believe he wants me to be. And I am, ironically, or maybe unironically, doing that very crazy thing I told my wife I wanted to do when I met her way back when.
That's awesome, man. And, like I mentioned to you before we started this, I played a lot of your books that are on YouTube for my daughters, because it gets difficult sometimes. We're not so much for the screens for kids, because that can cause a lot of issues, and you got to be careful what you're showing them anyways, because there's a lot of things that get lodged in your subconscious. And as you grow, we know all about this stuff. And so, I try to find kid-friendly things, which there really isn't. Even the children shows, are a little subversive. And anyway, we listen to your books that you have written, and they're good. They keep my interest. They keep my wife's interest. We learn things reading the children books, which I think is really good for not only the, obviously it's good because it's true, and you are, showing children the reality of the world in a gentle way, in a way that they can understand it, but also it's good too because the parents can learn something out of that as well. So there's like this mutual benefit from your books that I've discovered anyway. But before there's some things that you've touched on a lot there. So before we jump into more about the books and other things that you do for Classical Learner, I wanted to take a step back and actually go back to when you were a teacher. And in the system, I know that you said when you were a ninth grade teacher that the students there didn't know where Africa was on a map, or is rather. And were there any other instances when you were at a public school that you realized that this education is subpar and it's doing nothing for the children, really, the kids?
Yeah, I mean, there's the overall aspect, how disinterested children are in being there. They don't want to be there. They're not interested in learning. Everything's out of context. It doesn't mean anything to them. After 45 minutes, they crumple up their sheets and throw them in the garbage. It's pointless to the students, and they're right to think that way. I remember I was in a teacher's lounge with all these veteran teachers, and I was teaching a 12th grade economics class at the time. And I had this student, young woman, the 12th grader, young girl, and she had struggled academically throughout all of her time throughout high school. She didn't really do well in anything, and she was doing very well in my 12th grade economics class, which for anyone that has no experience in that, it's actually a rather complex subject matter for these young people to learn. And we were in the teacher's lounge, and they were asking me what I was doing, that she was doing so well, and they were making fun of her about how she wasn't very intelligent and whatnot. And I was sitting there, I remember thinking the only thing I really did that was special, or I guess unique, is I made sure she knew how much I believed in her. It's the only thing I did. And I went out of my way when she did. Yeah, obviously when she got in there, I would see things that she was doing wrong. But what I went out of my way to do was to point out what she was doing right and showing her, wow, that's amazing that you got this. I just talked to all the other students and you were the only one that got this. This is really impressive. And I'd ask her thoughts on it. And, the funny thing is when you show a young person that you believe in them, they start to believe in themselves. And that's why I credit my parents so much for myself and my willingness to operate my life so outside the box of how traditional people live, or more like how traditional people live, I should say, how modern people live, right? Opposite of how modern people live. But that was very eye-opening to me, to see that they had the attitude toward this child, and how many children coming through this system who hate being there, hate it for that reason. I was on my live stream today, and a lot of the neighborhood kids come to my house all the time. They want to play with my son. We have an awesome backyard. They run around and whatever. And yesterday, there's one of the third graders who comes here all the time was telling me that he might fail third grade. And I could tell he was very dejected by the entire situation. And it's horrible to think that a third grader would be dejected by the prospect of schooling, the prospect of learning when children are so naturally curious. So what I did is I pulled out my phone and I showed him a video that I recorded a few days earlier that I posted on Instagram. And the video basically stated that grades were useless, that the only point of grades is to artificially mark down where students are based on the artificial standards of losers at the Department of Education. And that a child should only be graded on that day, because if a child's reading at a third grade level and they're in fifth grade, well, you're telling me they're not going to catch up in a day, they're not going to catch up in a week, they're not going to catch up in a month, they're probably not going to catch up in a year. So you're telling me that for a very long duration of their life, you are telling that child that you are C, you are D, you are F, you are worthless. The only grade a child should be given is the work they did on that present day. Did you have an A day? Did you have a B day? Did you have a C day? And we don't judge that by whether they get things right or wrong. We simply judge that by, did you put in the work? And if you put in the work, then you had an A day. And if you know just a little bit more when you go to bed than you did when you woke up, then you had an A day. And when you string together enough A days and stop worrying about the artificial nonsense from these losers at the Department of Education, what you'll find is when that child is 15, 16, 17, 18 years old, they will be much more capable, much more competent than those said to be A students that are being pushed out by the school system, who still at 18 years old are completely and utterly incapable. They're A students. The A students that come through the public school system are, on an aggregate, the overwhelming majority are completely and utterly incapable of living a free and independent life where they care for themselves when they are 18 years old, which means the system is a complete and utter failure from the base level down.
Yeah. I agree with everything you're saying there. And so when I ask this question, I'm doing it more so to be a devil's advocate, because the audience of this show tends to vary. I speak with a various amount of, numerous amount of people, and they have extremely different views than you and I, especially when it comes to education. So numerous times during, your answer there, you call the Department of Education losers. While I agree with you, I would like for you to dive into that a little bit and explain why they're losers and why they're not actually helping children, especially with standardization. Is standardization really bad? Because you need to have some sort of standards to have a society. I think that would be one argument for the Department of Education. Hopefully that made sense there. I know it kind of went a little all over the place, but.
And the Department of Education is the Department of Injustice. And imagine you're sitting in a boardroom with the Department of Education, and they're determining the education standards for every child in the United States of America. What should be taught? What shouldn't be taught? What do these children need to know? And you step up in the middle of that meeting and say, we've really prioritized math and science. And, give it, we objectively suck at teaching them. As they always say, America is 10,000th of every country in the world and teaching math and science, right? So they objectively suck at that. But all right, we'll look beyond that. Say you've prioritized math and science and history and English. And again, I can't state enough that you're not actually good at teaching it. But, wouldn't it be more pertinent? Wouldn't it be more relevant to the lives of these children to also make sure that financial literacy is a school subject that we teach, from kindergarten on? I mean, this should be something that's a priority. 90, don't quote me here, but 95% of Americans are in debt. The average American during the 2009 financial crisis lost their home because they couldn't figure out how to come up with $500 extra a month. Like, don't you think maybe financial literacy should be more of a priority? Maybe we should make that a class just like math from the time they're in first grade. And they all just look at you like, now, why would you say something like that? I mean, they've set up this education system where children are put in this artificial environment, and they, from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. for 15 consecutive years, They sit between concrete walls where they're told to sit, and they listen to these teachers lecture them. And at the end of 15 years, the only skills that they have is the only thing they're able to do is if their grades are high enough, they can sign on a dotted line to take out a loan for debt that they don't even understand because they haven't even been given an education on what that debt is. Talk about a failure, right? Well, to me, the success or lack of success of an education should be judged on one metric and one metric only. Is the learner, if I give you my 3-year-old for the next 15 years, I'm going to give you my 3-year-old for 15 years. Will they be able to live a free and independent life after 15 years of you educating them? And if the answer is no, your education isn't worth, the diploma isn't worth the piece of paper it's written on.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. There really isn't much practical knowledge taught in public school, and it doesn't prepare, as you've been stating, children for the real world, for providing for themselves. It creates a system of essentially slaves, whether it be a debt slave or you're completely dependent upon a global supply chain. You're completely dependent upon big institutions to provide all your necessities and tell you what to do. Another thing that I think the public educational system kind of does is make you follow authority as opposed to reasoning. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Oh, do I have thoughts on that? I mean, remind me to talk about the whole facial covering situation at the end.
Yeah.
But let's think about the way children are taught history. Let's talk about the way they're taught about, doesn't really matter, whatever your topic, maybe the Civil War, where children are hand-fed this politically determined narrative, which I would argue is specifically crafted in a way to train children to judge each other by their immutable characteristics. You look this way, you're a victim. You look this way, you're an oppressor, which is like such a simplistic way and ridiculous way of looking at things. I mean, for example, my family arrived in America in the year 1910. Am I an oppressor because of the Civil War? I mean, the nonsense of that statement. But they're told to memorize this politically determined narrative. Whereas you can tell me that this happened in 1865, and I could repeat back to you what you just said. And you said, now you know history. Do I know history? Because I don't know if it was right or wrong. I just know that I was able to repeat back what you said. I was memorizing. So school is teaching the skill of memorization and masking it, and we've taught history. Masking it, and we taught science. And we'll get to science. Well, if a child is to properly learn history, and again, I am a historian, then they should be reading the primary writings on people on both sides of historical events. So they should be reading the primary writings of Abraham Lincoln, and they should be reading the primary writings of Stonewall Jackson, Ulysses S. Grant, and Robert E. Lee. When they're learning about the American Revolution, they should be reading the primary writings of George Washington and of King George. And that's such a foreign idea to so many people. They shouldn't learn that Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. That's nice. No, they should read the primary writings of Columbus and read the primary writings of the indigenous people or the people that were sympathetic to the cause of the indigenous people. Right? So the way children are taught history in school is completely wrong. And Columbus is a great example. When I say it's political, right? Let me delve into that. Well, when I was a child, Christopher Columbus was the hero. Christopher Columbus, Columbus Day, he was the hero. And by the time I graduated high school, Christopher Columbus was the villain. Now, the history is the history. The history never changed. What happened already happened. What changed was the agenda of the controlling bodies. So when I was a child in school, America had been, the powers that be had been promoting the military industrial complex and American imperialism, American militarism throughout the globe. And because of that, they needed to teach the population that this type of colonization, this type of imperialism was justified and a good thing. Well, the agenda switched to where they wanted to flood the so-called first world. And I find it, I don't like to use their terms, but I find it rude to refer to people in other countries as the third world. But the so-called first world, America, the West, they wanted to flood them with people from countries in the continent of Africa and South America, in the Middle East. And in order to do that, they had to separate people from their roots. So they said, Christopher Columbus was a monster. The founding fathers were monsters. The narrative changed, right? These are bad people. And because of that, you have no rightful claim over this land. So who are you to go against our agenda of letting people come in from the third world, right? So these historical narratives are very political, and that's why they teach memorization over critical thinking. If you want me to get more into that history, just remind me. I'll get more into how they rewrite. I'll tell you how they rewrite history textbooks, because I understand. I know the history of how they rewrite history. There's a whole history to it.
I would love to hear that. Yeah, I would love to dive into that some more, but I want you to finish what you're saying here.
When children learn science, they sit with a textbook and they memorize science. You're going to memorize the Big Bang Theory, and that's great and all. What they don't do is critical thinking within the schooling system. So children, the proper way to learn science is to have a hands-on relationship with the scientific method. Children should be out in nature. They should be observing. They should be categorizing. They should be formulating their own hypothesis, setting up controls, setting up independent, dependent variables, and testing and retesting their scientific hypothesis. And they should be doing this from the time they're 5 years old up until the time they're 18. But because they don't do this, so many people are completely and utterly incapable of questioning anyone who has a lab coat on. Mm-hmm. And again, there's a history to all this stuff and how they took over the medical, right? They turned medicine into an industry. And when they do that, they take over the universities. And the way doctors are taught, the way they are trained is based on a false premise, right? Whereas there couldn't possibly, what platforms are you on?
YouTube, BitChute, Odyssey, pretty much everything.
All right, I'm not gonna get you silenced. So anyway, you guys get the point. But so children are being taught memorization over critical thinking, and it should be the opposite, where critical thinking is prioritized over memorization. You think about the way children learn English. Well, all right, you're going to memorize, this is a verb, this is a noun, and that's nice and all, but they're receiving letter grades back. Oh, little Johnny, you wrote this paper and you get an A. Aren't you smart? Oh, little Susie, you wrote this paper and you get an F. Oh, actually, you're a girl, so we're gonna mark you up to an A and give Johnny an F because he sucks. But and then they get this letter grade back and it completely affects their self-esteem, but it doesn't mean anything to them. They wrote the paper, but they're not learning from it. Well, if critical thinking, if the process of learning was the actual objective, then it's actually the editing process, which is the single most important part of growing as a writer. And I should know I am an Amazon #1 bestseller. Just a shameless plug. But so these children should be sitting down and you should be editing, not grading, editing their work with them, because grading is useless. You should be editing their work with them. So I like what you did here, Susie. I like how you had a topic sentence. It really set the tone of everything. And, this next sentence is good, but it runs on a little bit. A couple of different ways you could have worded this. You could have put a comma here, right, and broken it up that way. You could have put a period here and then broke this up into two sentences. You could have used a semicolon, right? And I like what you did here with the thesis, because this was very powerful, because when I read this, I knew exactly what you were going to be talking about in the body of your essay. And this is really good writing, Susie. Now, let's make sure when we go through this, you and I, and you'll keep the mark, you'll do a little tally, if the points you make in your body stay in alignment with that thesis. Now, I understand, you might want to, some people have a writing style where they actually purposely get out of alignment with that thesis. Oh my God, never tell a child that. Again, I write fiction books and I'm a #1 bestseller. So yes, you can get out of line with your thesis, but you want your child to understand it, right? That's the important thing. And the funny thing is, when you teach a child this way, they will start to think about grammar. They'll think about their writing style as they write. And something even more powerful, as they read, they will pick up on the literary styles of different authors just through the act of reading. Critical thinking, the process of learning over memorization, antithetical to the nonsense which takes place in our public school systems, which have an overwhelming failure rate, as I have stated, I believe to be about 95%.
Yeah. So one thing that you touched on there before we jump into like the history book stuff and the face coverings that you alluded to at the beginning of that, I want to circle back around to the primary sources that you discussed. I studied when I was going to college for my brief period. I was going to study history, and so that's one of the most useful skills I learned going for that degree is how to properly search for primary sources and how to try to get as close to the truth as you can through the primary sources, if you will. But in the public education system, you don't see that often. Now, I've heard you in one of your TikTok videos, I believe, talking about there are private schools that actually will encourage, or that's not encourage rather, but that's part of their curriculum where they will show the child the primary document and have them research that and study it and then come up with their own conclusions of events based on, firsthand documents. So would you then say that if a parent can afford it or parents can afford it, private school would be the way to go? Or do you think that homeschooling is still better?
Well, it depends on the private school. A lot of private schools are just public schools with lipstick on because they're still capitulating to the requirements of the Department of Education. Now, there are private schools that are very good, and I would encourage all parents, no matter where they send their children, I don't have a problem with private schools, but make sure you know the principal, you know the teachers, and you're comfortable with the mission of that school. And as long as you're comfortable with that and you have an active relationship with the school, it should be fine. I attend a church on Sundays, and I'm actually considering having my boy attend their private school on Tuesdays and Thursdays, just for the experience of being with peers on Tuesday and Thursday, because I am comfortable with what I've seen from them to this point. So I'm not completely against that. Now, homeschool is vastly superior in every way because it gives you complete flexibility to teach your children what and how you want to teach them, right? You can follow the interest of your child. If, whatever it is, you can follow that interest and they're naturally motivated to do it. It's just a better model, right? Mm-hmm. But in terms of the private schools that you asked about, John Taylor Gatto did research into the real elite private schools in the United States of America. And he found 14 key themes that these private schools had in common. And one of those themes was a lot of work with primary documents, that the work was by high school was 80% driven by the student, where you compare that to public school where the work is 99% driven by the teacher. That students, through working with primary documents and their studies, were tasked with developing their own unique understanding of history and gaining insights into the function of institutions. So like earlier this stream, I talked about how our students are studying the media industrial complex. Mm-hmm. That's that concept in practice. Our students are reading the original document released by the Congressional Church Committee about their report on the funding that was coming from the CIA to the corporate media, right? So children are reading that primary document and forming their own unique understanding of that relationship through the primary document. We are teaching them how to track parent corporations. So you might see that choice. There's this abundance of choice when you turn on the television, but ABC is owned by Disney, ESPN is owned by Disney, right? There's 5 corporations control 90% of everything you see on television, including Hollywood, including Netflix, including Hulu. So there appears to be this abundance of choice, but very few people are in control of that. So you say, well, who are these people that are in control? How do we track them? How do we track their financial interests? What groups do they belong to? So we actually studied documented members of, okay, so all of these members of the media are also members of the Council on Foreign Relations. What is the Council on Foreign Relations? Why haven't I heard about it? Let's go to their website and read what they say they're about, right? So it's about just following, poking, prodding, and letting children gain their own unique understanding about how these institutions function, about historical events, through reading primary documents. One of the things the students at these elite private schools do is they're actually tasked through the study of history, through the study of law, through the study of sociology, with they are tasked with formulating their own unique theory about what makes people tick. They study psychology, what makes people tick. And then at the same time, they're getting a classical education in grammar, logic, and rhetoric. For those of you not familiar, classical education goes back thousands of years. Education is broken into three parts. This is called the classical trivium of grammar, logic, and rhetoric. The grammar phase is the so-called memorization phase, but it's a little bit deeper than that. But basically, it comes down to teaching children that words have meaning, that when you're in a debate with someone, you have to get them to define their term. Because when you listen to one politician and he says, I stand for equality, by that, he might mean of outcome and taking away all your rights. And another politician might say, I stand for equality, and he might mean of rights. Now, that's more in line with what I'm interested in, but I have to know what he's talking about. So I have to make him define that term. I mean, he's probably lying anyway because he's a politician. He's a sleazeball. The second phase is logic, right? If A, then B, then C. I think people know what logic is. And the third phase, well, most people don't have logic. I say a large portion of the population, but you know what it is. And the third phase is rhetoric, which is the art form of touching people emotionally so that they can connect with your message and you can pass your wisdom on from yourself to them. So as I always tell people, listen, if you want your children to walk around being completely illogical, emotionally controlled morons, no, I'm just kidding. That's too much rhetoric, Send them to public school. But if you want them to be critically thinking legends, then pull them out of school, homeschool them, teach them the classical trivium, and my God, sign up for classical learner homeschool. And that entire last statement was rhetoric. I'm not calling your children morons. In fact, I know many public school children who are very smart, and many of my friends people I respect more than anyone in the world went through the public school system. I came through the public school system. So it in no means, it doesn't mean that your child is broken. It doesn't mean that your child is worth any less or that they won't be successful. But on average, and just the way everything's structured, you're giving your child a much better, a much superior education if you're pulling them out and homeschooling them.
Now, that's a big fear for most people. So I have a lot of friends who, not a lot, but a couple who have kids about the same age as mine. And they, we talk about what we're going to do for educating our children and stuff. And they know my wife and I, we plan on homeschooling our children. And to them, they're intimidated by it because either they didn't do too well in school or they don't know if they can come up with a curriculum to teach their children. So what would you say to somebody who's like, I can't teach my children, I can't prepare them for I can't educate them. That's what, I pay my tax dollars for. They're supposed to do that. So what do you say to the parent who may be a little, resistant to the idea of homeschooling, mostly out of fear?
Yeah, well, one of the best parts about homeschooling is the process of learning itself, that as you teach children the process of learning, you're going through it with them. So a lot of what you're doing, you have to learn. But in terms of, I don't know if I could teach this or that, the homeschool curriculums that have been developed over the last 30 years, and this year I might add is my own, are really phenomenal. And they're far superior than what's being taught in public school because they are rooted in that idea that you can follow the interest of your child, or a classical education, that there's structure to the way that children can learn. And whichever curriculum you buy, whether it's classical conversations, the good and the beautiful, it completely guides you in exactly what you have to do, how to teach the student, and it guides the student on exactly what they have to do within the learning process. And then even for like really complicated subjects like, I can't teach my child trigonometry. Well, there's curriculums like Time for Learning, which are computer-based, and your child sits in front of the computer and it will step by step teach them how to do advanced trigonometry. And it actually has built-in systems where it's testing their knowledge at all times. If they're not getting it, it just automatically backtracks and teaches it in a different way until it breaks through to them and they start getting the problems right. And then it moves on.
Wow, that's incredible. That's a really cool program. I knew about the homeschooling groups and how you can, count on somebody else who may be, stronger in math or science or whatever the field it may be of study. But I didn't realize they had actual computer programs that will teach you these complicated math or these more advanced math levels. So that's really interesting. So you alluded to it there, the Homeschool Connect that had just released, I believe, in 2021 for the classical learner business. Could you go into that a little bit, what that is?
Yeah, so 3 years ago, I started the Classical Learner Homeschooling Company. And at the time, I had just broken free from the system and I started doing one-on-one parent consultations, essentially where I was setting up their entire homeschools, which is something I still do. But I actually try to deter people from hiring me. So I upped my price a lot, but people still hire me. But but it takes up a lot of my time because I meet with them. Then I put together all my recommendations, which I usually for like a week. And then I'll meet with them again and we'll go over my recommendations. But I was doing that year one. Year two, which was 2021, I built out essentially my own app, which is Homeschools Connected. And in 2021, it was really just, I built it as a place, as a resource for homeschool families. So it was somewhere you can go and get access to all of my curriculum research. So people would sign up and they'd be able to find the best resources on the internet. If you want to teach your child, because so much of homeschooling is teaching your child what they're interested in. So if you want to teach your child architecture, there are programs and books for that. And I know where to find them: interior design, cooking, photography, videography, computer coding, construction, engineering, STEM, and then math, science, history, and all that. So it was a really good resource for homeschool families, and a lot of people joined, and that was cool. And then we also set up state groups where people in Ohio could hook up with people in Ohio, people in people in Illinois can hook up with people in Illinois, people in Missouri can hook up with people in Missouri. You get it. You guys are getting it. You guys get the concept. So I set up the platform and it was really good. And this year we actually started building out our original classical learner curriculum. And that's what, and it's been so successful. And we've been blown away with how many people have signed up and how many people are staying and they love it. And basically every Thursday at 10:30 a.m., I teach the class on propaganda using the Cahsapp children's book series. Our students are studying the media industrial complex. We'll be studying the medical and military industrial complexes. And we're doing our year-long nature unit study in which our students are learning geography. They are mapping out their properties. They're tracking the sun. They're planting seeds. They're composting. And they'll be getting their first entrepreneurial experience this year. And in our community, we have a rule. We call it the rule of 6. Every 6 months throughout your child's life, from the time they're 5 years old, they have to do something entrepreneurial or entrepreneurial adjacent. And all of our students are doing that. I coach all my members one-on-one. I have a 15 and a 16-year-old right now who are, they know the basics of HTML. So we have them researching restaurants in their area. They're going to find 10 restaurants in their area that don't have websites. They only have Facebook pages. They're going to approach 3 of the restaurants and offer to build them websites for free. After they build the websites for free and proof their concept, they are going to create their own websites showing other restaurants in the area what they're capable of doing. They're then going to go to these other restaurants and say, this is what I did for your competitors, and they're blowing you out of the water, but don't worry, I can do this for you. And by the time they're 18 years old, when they have 5, 6, 7 restaurants paying them $1,000 a month, which is $12,000 a year, they will have complete and utter financial independence. We have a member of our homeschool community right now whose daughter was artsy. So they went to the store, they bought materials, and she's making all of these bracelets, and she's actually going to get a table at a local farmer's market and be selling her bracelets. And I spoke to the mother, and if she likes that afterwards, again, we're going to do the website design. We're going to have her learn the basics of marketing and sales and accounting. All our students do financial literacy. So there's my boy. What's up, Brady Bean? So that's what we're doing with Homeschools Connected. And it's $10 a month with the promo code together. So anyone who doesn't join, I don't know what you're thinking.
No, man, that's so awesome,
man.
Especially encouraging young kids to become entrepreneurs. Like what was the well, actually, I won't even ask that. What's going on, man?
Coming up. In a little bit, okay? After my stream.
So are you, so you obviously don't believe that being an entrepreneur is something that's like genetic. Like there's some people out there that believe not everybody can start their own business. You think the opposite of that, it looks like, from your philosophy that you're trying to install in your educational system here.
I was reading a book with my boy right here, about 2 months ago, and we were reading The Gingerbread Man. I'm the Gingerbread Man, catch me if you can. And he said to me, Dad, we should make a video of this book and put it online, and then people will buy it. Because that's what he sees me do all the time. Entrepreneurialism is a mindset, and you can coach that into your children from the time they're 5 years old, which is why every 6 months we have our children do something entrepreneurial. And I see it time and time again. I mean, I can't tell you how many children I have doing entrepreneurial things within my community, which is why we kind of laugh. We're like, $10 a month. We have the children making more than that.
Well, yeah, but, I mean, you got one making $12,000 a year, $1,000 a month from making websites. That is impressive.
What's up, Papa Bean? Yeah, that's pretty heavy, Brady. I worked with an 8-year-old, his father, who was interested in cars. So I said, why are you doing all the subtle stuff? Teach him about cars. He said, what do you mean? I was like, he likes cars, so teach him about cars. So we had him teach the 8-year-old about changing oil. And then we introduced him to marketing. So we had the 8-year-old make flyers. He did the artwork on the flyers. He put them on the neighbors' doors, saying that he would change their oil. And the neighbors actually hired this boy 2 months later to change their oil. And then the dad was so inspired by what we had done, because I developed the mindset in the father. I create the mindset in the parents, and the parents create the mindset in the children, that the father actually purchased a clunker, and they spent the next year building up a car together.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I mean, entrepreneurialism is something that can be coached into children, but really what it's about more than anything else is giving, they could grow up and decide they want to work for someone. That's fine. But you want to give your children the mindset and the tools to live a free and independent life. And the way that you do that is you focus on the process of learning and critical thinking, skill development, and entrepreneurial experience. So when I say skills, construction, engineering, art, music, photography, videography, these are skills, computer coding, right? Skills, anything that allows them to take what's in their mind and produce it within physical reality will give them the confidence and the know-how to do whatever they want to do when they grow up, so that they can be successful. And then when you combine that with critical thinking and a childhood filled with entrepreneurial experience, there is no limit to what your children could do in this world.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. Like, and I completely agree with the entrepreneurism being a mindset as opposed to something that's like innate in a person, So like, something I've discovered with a lot of people that I've talked to during this whole pandemic, right, where people were afraid to lose their jobs because of these mandates being in place. One thing that I didn't really have any issue with is the potential of I actually did lose my job during the pandemic, because I told them I would not wear a mask. I would not comply with that. And they actually told me, a little short aside, that I would have to change my belief system in order to keep working for the company. That's what the vice president of my company said at the time. And I was like, well, that's illegal as hell. Because I told him I have religious exemptions. I was very professional with it, but I just poorly delivered the information, which I think is why it went the way it went. Anyway, but when that happened, I wasn't deterred or worried or anything, because I was like, well, I know, like, there's many ways one can make money. You don't need a job to make money, whether it's like doing like retail flipping, going to like Dollar General and then selling an item on a higher price on eBay or Amazon, because they'll buy it for much higher than what you can get at a clearance section. Or like automotive, I've worked on cars, I've been doing that for a while now. And, I was able to find a few jobs doing that. And so when you tell people that, you don't necessarily need to be dependent on a job to make money, I feel that so many people have a hard time understanding that concept. And the system that you're creating here is truly empowering, because it's like it's completing like an education that will allow somebody to be self-sufficient completely. You know what I mean?
That's what it's about. The mark of a worthy education is if the learner is capable of living an independent and free life, which is why we're focusing on the gardening this year. They're doing the composting, they're planting the seeds, they're getting the crops. Within those lessons, they're unit studies. So we're teaching them the skill of art. We're teaching them the skill of videography, photography, basics of construction, right? These skills. And then what we tell the parents is, your children might not be interested in all these skills. Not every skill is for every child, but whichever ones they take to, whichever skills they show interest in, then that's when you say, oh, little Sarah really likes art. Now we're going to take her over to 21 Draw Space, which is a great free resource, and we're going to have her become very proficient in the skill of art. And then we're going to use that skill of art to get her entrepreneurial experience every 6 months from the time she is 5 years old. So when she's 11 years old and she starts her own business as a contractor on a website like Fiverr, doing the illustrations for people's children's books or for their book covers. And she's been doing that since she's 11, 12 years old. And now she's been doing that for years. And by the time she's 16, 17 years old, she has this gigantic portfolio as a contractor on Fiverr. And she's gone from when she started, where she could charge $5 for a page, to now where people are willing to hire her for $150, $200, $300 a page. She's 18 years old and she is her own boss, and she has complete freedom over how she wants to live her life as she goes into adulthood.
Yeah, that's just so incredible to me. And I don't even, it blows my mind that somebody's actually doing this. It really does, because, for years, I've looked for alternatives in various fields. But with education, as my wife and I, are going to homeschool, we're like, okay, well, we have to look up these curriculums and figure out which one's going to be best for our child. But we always knew that we wanted to cater to their interest. But, nobody has ever provided a roadmap, to me anyway. I haven't done as much research as you. So maybe you're just working off the foundation of other people's works. But, it's just so incredible to hear somebody's actually like starting a curriculum that will allow the parent to essentially cater to the child's interest in a actual, or not actual, I don't want to say legitimate way of education, but it's I guess, yeah, we'll just say a legitimate way of educating, which I think is the role of the parent anyway, is to educate, which is why I believe everybody should homeschool their children. I feel like it's part of being a parent. That's like your job to homeschool. And I think it's really cool what you're doing here. Now, have you seen an uptick in people coming over and subscribing to, whether it be just the Classical Learner to get your consulting, or the Homeschool Connect? And if you have, do you think that's in part due to the mandates that have been taking place across public schools?
Yeah, I mean, and from January of this year, I don't do the exact math on it, but we've grown over 100% in membership.
Wow, that's awesome.
So our membership has gone through the roof. And like I said, everyone, did I lose you?
Nope, I'm here.
Our membership has gone through the roof, and our retention rates have been phenomenal, in the 90 percentile. So I'm very excited about that. And if you just look at homeschooling as an aggregate, 2 years ago, there were 3 million homeschoolers in America. Today, there are over 11 million. I can't go to the park without meeting a homeschool family, which is a beautiful thing. And, it used to be, it's funny because it used to be like the taboo thing that you homeschool. And now it's people are like, oh man, I wish I could take my child out of school. I feel so trapped by the public school system, because everyone wants their children out of that forsaken system.
Yes. Yeah, they do.
That's what I wanted to talk about. So the facial coverings, right? So even like when people talk about public school and you see all the parents and they're outraged about the facial situation, and they go to the school meetings and they voice their concern, and that's great and all. But whether the school system gives into you or not, if that's the way the school system has handled everything that's happened since March of 2020, what are they teaching the children in that school about questioning these authorities? Because I would argue they're not teaching them to question these authorities at all. In fact, they're telling the children that questioning these authorities is a very bad and dangerous thing.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's just a lot of fear, I feel, being driven into the minds of the children right now. And this is something I've been talking about for a while, is what are the psychological ramifications going to be, in society once these children who are being, exposed to this deranged thinking and just this abuse of power. Like, what is society going to be after, another 18 years of, a couple generations actually coming out of this public education system? Do you have any thoughts on that? Have you thought about that at all? Like,
I think about it a lot. I think that, hypochondria is a thing, right?
Right.
They are doing some serious psychological damage to an entire generation of children. They used to talk about homeschool and socialization. Let's talk about going to school and being told that if you don't cover your face, that if you get within 6 feet of your friend, that your friend is an imminent threat to you, your mother, and your grandmother. That roughhousing, that playing, that being a child, what's very natural to you, is an extremely dangerous activity. What does that do to the psychological, the social makeup of an entire generation of children that they are trying to break right now?
Right. And, you can't just pin all the blame on the education system either, because what I've noticed is a lot of parents are against what's taking place, but yet they don't show their child how to stand up for what they believe in, or stand up for the truth, not even so much what you believe in, but what you know to be true and what you know to be wrong. And a lot of parents just aren't taking that initiative right now, I feel like, to protect their children.
Oh, if I had a high school level child and I was sending them to public school, their only assignment would be I would have them fight it. I'd be like, all right, well, you're going to public school, so you fight it. Don't let them make you wear it. And we would go over how to do that, and they could fight it. You got to push back against the system.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the most important thing to do, in my opinion, is to maybe not necessarily fight back, but find alternatives that will allow you to thrive, as opposed to thinking that you're completely dependent on the system that has been established, and you think everybody, like your whole family, your friends have gone through the system, and so that's the way you do things. But you're not actually, like, you don't realize that there's other ways out there. And so, that's one of the main reasons I wanted to speak with you, is to expose the idea of homeschooling and how beautiful it can be, and the level of education that is received when you actually take the time to focus on your child's interest and try to improve, try to guide them in that direction, so that way they can actually make a living off of that. There's this influencer, I'm not sure if you heard of him at all, but I think his name is Gary Vaynerchuk. He's an entrepreneur. He's a big social media influencer guy, and more mainstream than anything. But anyway, there's something that I like that he says, and that is, don't so much focus on your weaknesses, focus on your strengths, and go all in on your strengths. And I feel like that's what your education curriculum is catered to, is more so the strengths of the child, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, well, some children are artsy, some children are very analytical, and it doesn't make sense to fight the way your child learns and what they're interested in learning about. And with everything we do, we just, I tell the members of my community that you use their interest to develop skills. Follow their interests, get them some skills. Use the skills to get them entrepreneurial experience. Use the entrepreneurial experience to develop ancillary skills, and just keep expanding out and getting them more skills. And then just know that with everything, take his pants off. Can you not be in the camera? Because you can't be in the camera with that, okay? So I do have to wrap this up soon.
Yep.
But yeah, that you want to teach your children, the most important thing you do is keep developing skills within everything they're doing. And yes.
Don't say wrap up.
Don't say wrap up?
Yeah, my mom does say that.
Oh, okay. So keep developing skills within everything they're doing. And if you do that and you develop that mindset, they will do very well in life.
Yeah. So Brett, where can people find you if they want to stay up to date with everything that you do, whether it be, the posts you make, the videos you make, or, the blogs you write? Where can people find you?
Yeah, I am classicallearner.com on TikTok. I am Cubs to Bears on TikTok. I have 2 channels on there. I am Classical Learner on Instagram, Classical Learner on YouTube, Classical Learner on Beartaria Times, Classical Learner on Gab, Twitter, that dreadful site. I can't believe I haven't been kicked off yet. But pretty much everything you can find me, Classical Learner.
Awesome. So I'll be sure to put the links in the description so everybody can find your work and get to it very easily. But Brett, I thank you so much for coming on the show, man. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. Had a great time.
Of course.